My name is Samantha Nieves. I was born and raised in East Los Angeles, and I still live there. My mother migrated from El Salvador when she was about 6 or so, and I don't really know too much about my father since our relationship is estranged. However, my mother, upon migrating here, she automatically knew she should be in the working class field, and so yes, my whole life she's been working a lot. At home, I have 2 older siblings and a younger sibling. From an early age, I would say that, even my oldest memory was of me screaming, blocking out the domestic violence happening at home upon my family members. And so I would say that that would be again the earliest memory I had. However, I never really learned how to talk about what was going on at home, so therefore my strategy was to disassociate and to remove myself from whatever was going on at home, which I now know can have a lot of repercussions. From an early age, I recognized how I would dissociate from, the age of 6 all the way up until I would say, honestly, pretty recently. I think I'm still trying to break out of that habit because when there's chaos, I kind of feel like I already know what to do. However, even in high school when there was an altercation between my 2 brothers in which the repercussion could have been very deadly, unfortunately it was not. But I think that time in itself, that was in sophomore year, I was about 16, and from that time too I recognized that that was the mode I had to be in order to get from the day to day. And so at that time in sophomore year, I would look forward to being in marching band. I would have to be there at 7 in the morning and play my trombone because I love playing music. And I also recognized that I didn't value traditional therapy. I valued non-traditional forms of therapy, such as music or community spaces, but I was very much involved with music. And so yeah, I saw music as my form of therapy, and that really got me from day to day. But as far as when I stopped dissociating, I think that it's still something I'm learning to not do. I very much recognize I come from a dysfunctional household, and in that sense, my brothers were in and out of incarceration systems, in and out of foster care, and on top of that, my mother was, being the person to carry a lot of that stress. But for me, I did not feel like, I didn't want to ask for help. I didn't want to be vulnerable with the people who are already going through a lot. So I would say no, I did not have anybody to support me throughout this time other than, music or journaling or, of course, art, my favorite thing. I like talking about my educational journey when I talk about my first experience with therapy because I actually felt pushed out of high school by the time I was in junior year. And so for my senior year, I did not return. I struggled with depression, loneliness, and a lot of those feelings. I'm not feeling motivated to continue with school. However, once I felt ready, I spoke to, funny enough, the counselor at school, and she referred me to a continuation school. And so at this continuation school, I was able to have access to a therapist who I never had access to. I never knew, again, that I could talk about my feelings with someone who was getting paid to talk to me. But with discussing with her and the questions she would ask me, I recognized that there was a lot of things I was pushing down and not really honoring to start to heal. So yeah, that was my first experience with a therapist at my continuation school. And following that, as I've mentioned, I finished school right when the pandemic hit. Thank God. And so that was, again, the last time I had a professional to talk to about what I was going through. And following that, I began at ELAC, and now I am in their STAND program, which isn't exactly therapy. It's more so workshops that help me process what I'm going through in my anxious mind. So that's where I'm at now. Another thing that helped too was creating spaces where we could talk about mental health and destigmatize together, utilizing art. That's what I would say I feel most comfortable in. My interest in poetry began when my brother showed me a poem by Pablo Neruda, which was called Tonight I Could Write the Saddest Lines. And I think in that poem I recognize, okay, there's a lot of sadness that could be beautified or romanticized through poetry. And so that was my first experience with poetry. And since then I've been writing just different metaphorical things that can help me with my journey and help other people with their journey towards identity as well. So yeah, I remember writing poems very dark because again, you have to write from where you are. So I was in a dark place. I wrote a lot of sad poems. However, looking back at it now, I think it's brave of me to have written that and brave of me to still continue to share that in the moments that I was struggling with at that time. My relationship with the East Los Angeles Library actually goes as far back as I can remember, given my mother works there. And so I always recognized the library to be a communal place in which I never really valued up until I had an internship with the Chicano Resource Center. And with the Chicano Resource Center, I was given the leadership and a stipend to create a cultural events for my community. And I think that that really awoke in me to, you know, the potential I have as an organizer, as a facilitator that intentionally thinks about, you know, destigmatizing mental health and intentionally making spaces for marginalized community given, you know, the exclusion of public institutions. My healing journey, I recognize, has been ongoing ever since I started writing poetry, I would say, because of the fact that, again, art allowed me to validate my own emotions, meanwhile helping others validate their own. So in other words, what really helps me through this healing process is knowing that I can potentially create an opportunity for folks to also not go through what I went through when I was younger. And especially, you know, I think about my brothers a lot when I do the organization work I do, when I create any workshop I create. I think about people like my brothers or people who may not feel like they have access or not know where to start, you know, talking about what they're going through. So my healing journey is very much embedded in communities' healing journeys. I think that and that in itself can get a little problematic in my mental health journey as well, because I tend to put a lot of expectations on myself. However, knowing that there's different communities I can tap into and different communities that support my vision, I think that that has definitely helped my healing journey as far as, you know, becoming more confident in myself and my potential to, again, talk about mental health. So I would very much say, yeah, the work I do with community helps me. I would advocate for journaling because there's so much you can learn about yourself and so much that you're going through in your head that you yourself, the person going through it, may not be able to validate until you see it on paper. And I think that that would be, you know, the first advice I would give, journal, because, you know, you'll find that what you're going through is not limited to you. There's a whole community, there's multiple communities that are experiencing that. However, you know, you have to be able to know where you're at in order to check in with your capacity, your mental health, your spiritual health, and of course your physical health. But nonetheless, I would also advocate for, plugging into different communities that are doing the work that you align with, because behind every community is just amazing people who support you and support your wellness too. And so that's personally what I found to be most helpful, working with people who recognize and value your capacity. So yeah, I would say that those are two pieces of advice. Another piece of advice I would give is to make space. As an artist, as a, you know, brown Latina, and also pursuing higher education, I recognize that no one's really going to advocate for me unless I do that and I make those spaces happen. So I would advise that, you know, you make those spaces happen and you make sure that that space honors what you value, and, you know, the people in there are going to do that as well. As a self-identified Chicana, I recognize that I want to be able to, again, advocate for the spaces that need to exist more so in public institutions. So therefore, myself being involved with arts and community, I really want to start to see ourselves represented in public institutions and contributing to collective memory. And that all comes down to, again, how ready and prepared we feel for that. So for me, my goal as a mental health advocate is to, again, just promote other people to make those spaces happen and to make sure that they are seen, because for too long we've already been, excluded from conversations, excluded from public institutions. However, we need to demand what we need, what resources we need. And that's typically not always up to one person. We have to know that that happens in community. So I look forward to making more spaces happen that intentionally bring destigmatizing conversations forward.